All right, let's start to add in some CSS to limit the width of this card. Now we've already seen one CSS file inside of our code editor. That was inside the src directory. We saw the styles.css file. And we read that comment at the top. It said something like, you can add global styles to this file. The term here, global styles, means that we should add CSS inside of here that we want to be applied to our entire project, like every last single element inside of our project. Right now, we are trying to add in some styling that's going to affect specifically this card thing that we are displaying. So we are not really trying to add in some global styling right now. Instead, we want to affect one element that is created inside of specifically that app component HTML file. So it turns out that with Angular, we really have two different types of CSS files, two different places to put any custom CSS we want to write. So quick diagram to explain these two different types of files. Now on the left-hand side, I'm showing some kind of imaginary application. So in this imaginary application, we can kind of picture that maybe there are different parts of the screen that have some different content inside them. Everything inside this gray box right here might be created with some HTML coming out of the app.component HTML file. And then maybe all these other regions are created by some other thing. In this case, I'm calling it a component. We'll discuss exactly what a component means in just a moment. But we're essentially saying here, these other boxes are being created by something other than the app component HTML file. Now, inside of our project, if we flip back over really quickly and open up your app directory, you'll notice inside there is a app component.css file. So what is that other file about? Well, the styles.css file, just like we saw inside that comment, contains CSS that is going to apply to every last element inside of our application. So for example, if we want to style every single button element, every div, every table, every h1, we would add that styling to styles.css. And so anything we put inside there would affect content in that area, and over here, and over down in here, and so on. You get the idea. If we ever want to style anything that is created by some specific HTML file, like our app component HTML file, we are always going to place that CSS inside of the similarly named CSS file. So because we want to style some HTML that was created by app.component.html, we're going to place the styling for that in app component CSS. Now, it might seem like this is just like an organization thing, like, hey, in order to manage CSS on large projects, let's just kind of pair our CSS files with the HTML. Well, that's not quite it. You see, Angular has a little bit of magic built into it, as you're going to see very quickly. It turns out that any CSS that we put inside this app component.css file can only affect the styling of elements that were created inside of app component HTML. In other words, we cannot possibly, in any way, shape, or form, write any styling inside of this file that would affect any elements created by other things inside of our application. So in other words, app component CSS cannot contain styling affecting these other regions. Now this is 100% contrary to how normal CSS works in the browser. Remember, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Essentially means that any styling we write is going to affect all the elements throughout our application. So Angular has a little bit of trickery, and like I said, a little bit of magic to make sure that CSS that gets placed inside of here only affects content created by its accompanying HTML file. Now that I've given you an exhaustive verbal description, let's actually test all this stuff out. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to my editor, and I'm going to find that app component CSS file. Again, that is inside the app directory. So inside of here, we can only affect elements created inside of app component HTML. Let me prove that to you. Inside of app component CSS, I'm going to try to style the body element. So on the body element, I'm going to try to apply a border of 10 pixels solid red. And I'll even put important on here, just to make sure, like 100%, we are really trying to add that styling in. So I'm going to save this file. I'll then flip back over to my application, and we're going to see there is no border whatsoever visible inside of here. No border around the outside edge. If we open up our element inspector and click on elements, you can find the body element right there and click it, and you're going to see inside the styling panel, there is no reference whatsoever to that rule that we just added in. So again, total magic on the part of Angular. It is not going to let you affect any element outside of elements that are created by the app component HTML file. So now with that in mind, I'm going to delete that rule, and we're going to try to add in the actual CSS we need to limit the width of that card element. So back inside of app card HTML, you'll notice that the top element right here has a class of card. So let's try to just write a selector that's going to get that element right there, and then apply a width property to it. Or a width rule, excuse me. Working with CSS now. So inside of app component CSS, I'll do .card, and I'll say width of 350 pix. So now this is going to try to find some element inside of our accompanying HTML file. It's going to find that thing right there and apply the width rule to it. So I'm going to save both these files, flip back over, and now I'll see that my card is of a very reasonable size, down to 350 pixels. And you'll notice that I'm at 100% zoom right now, so you should see something very similar on your screen as well. Okay, so that's the basics of CSS files in Angular. Remember, we've got these two different types of CSS files. One is going to have global styles, one is going to have stuff specific for our different components. Now that we've got all this styling fixed up, let's continue with our application in just a moment.